The sun had just begun its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink as Emirates Flight 407, a towering Airbus A380, prepared for takeoff. The massive aircraft, a symbol of luxury and engineering marvel, stood proudly on the tarmac, its powerful Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines humming with anticipation. The aircraft was bound for Sydney, a long-haul journey that had been completed countless times without incident. Inside, the mood was light. Families chatted excitedly, business travelers settled in with their laptops, and flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering warm towels and pre-flight refreshments. Captain Richard Hayes, a seasoned pilot with over 20 years of experience, sat in the cockpit, checking the instruments alongside his co-pilot, First Officer James Carter. They had flown together before, a well-oiled machine accustomed to the rigorous demands of long-haul travel. At exactly 5:45 p.m., Emirates Flight 407 received clearance for takeoff. The pilots guided the massive A380 down the runway, and with a powerful roar, the aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky, heading toward its destination. Everything was smooth, routine, and ordinary, but 30 minutes into the flight, everything changed. Disaster at 21,000 feet. As the aircraft climbed through 20,000 feet, a faint but strange vibration rippled through the fuselage. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, something that could easily be brushed off as turbulence. But then, suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the aircraft. Passengers screamed, overhead compartments rattled, a few even bursting open and spilling bags onto terrified travelers. The plane shuddered violently, pitching slightly to one side. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes and his first officer, Alan Foster, were startled by a shrill warning alarm. Engine fire detected. Number 2 engine flames. The automated voice of the aircraft's warning system declared. Hayes immediately checked his instruments. Both pilots gasped. The right side engine was engulfed in flames, the temperature gauge redlining. Extinguishers, now. Hayes ordered. Foster immediately reached for the fire suppression system, but before he could activate it, another massive explosion rocked the left side of the aircraft. The force was so strong that passengers were flung against their seats, oxygen masks dropping like airy ghosts from the overhead panels. This time, the second engine was on fire. The massive A381, a symbol of modern aviation, was now a flaming beast in the sky. A desperate fight for survival. Thick smoke billowed into the cabin. Passengers gasped for breath as oxygen masks dangled limply. The cabin crew rushed to assist, their training taking over even in the face of chaos. A mother held onto her child, whispering reassurances. A businessman clutched his phone, trying in vain to send a message. An elderly couple clasped hands, their eyes locked in silent understanding. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilots were battling an impossible situation. The fire was spreading, alarms blared, red lights flashing like a scene from a nightmare. Hayes and Foster fought the controls, but the engines were failing one by one. Then came the moment that every pilot dreads. Engine 1 flame out. Engine 2 flame out. Captain, we've lost all power. A moment of silence. Then, a deafening beeping sound filled the cockpit as the instrument panel lit up like a Christmas tree. The plane started falling, dipping its nose as it sliced through the air like a wounded beast. Hayes struggled against the yoke, sweat glistening on his forehead. Come on, hold it together, he growled, fighting the controls with every ounce of strength he had. Passengers screamed as the massive aircraft began to tilt violently to one side, caught in an uncontrollable dive. Through the cockpit window, Hayes saw a terrifying sight: a jagged mountain range growing larger by the second. At that moment, everyone on board realized the inevitable: terror, panic, silence. With no engines, no control, and no hope of recovery, Emirates Flight 407 plunged toward the waiting mountains below, its fate now sealed by a merciless twist of fate.
The final moments. The cockpit was bathed in a dim, flashing red glow as warning alarms shrieked, a deafening symphony of impending doom. Captain Ryan Parker and First Officer Michael Foster fought desperately with the controls, their hands slick with sweat as they tried to steady the spiraling Airbus A380. The aircraft, now completely deprived of engine power, was in a terrifying freefall, plunging rapidly toward the rugged mountain range below. The situation was growing more hopeless by the second. Mayday! 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 This is Emirates Flight 407. We have lost all 4 engines. Attempting emergency landing, request immediate assistance. Captain Parker's voice was calm, but his grip on the yoke was white-knuckled as he tried to slow their descent. A crackling response came from air traffic control. Emirates 407, maintain course, attempt to reach an emergency landing site, if possible. Stay with us. But both pilots knew the cruel truth: they weren't going to make it to an airport. The cabin, fear, and final moments. In the main cabin, Oxygen masks dangled lifelessly, spent of oxygen. The air was thick with acrid smoke, making it difficult to breathe. The plane was dropping fast, its descent uncontrollable. The screams of passengers mixed with the deafening wind and blaring alarms. People clung to each other. A father wrapped his arms around his two young daughters, whispering a prayer into their ears. An elderly woman clutched her husband's hand, their fingers entwined tightly. A flight attendant knelt beside a crying teenager, offering words of comfort even as her own hands trembled. Out the windows, passengers saw the jagged peaks of the mountains getting closer. Panic turned into despair. Back in the cockpit, Captain Parker had only one option left to attempt a crash landing on the side of the mountain. "Brace for impact," he bellowed into the intercom, his voice strained but commanding. Flight attendants rushed down the aisles, yelling for passengers to brace for impact. Some people obeyed. Others sobbed, whispering their final prayers. The ground surged closer. The crash, with all engines dead, Flight 407 fell through the sky like a wounded bird, powerless to stop its fate. The ground loomed closer and closer, the jagged peaks rising up to meet them. At the last moment, Captain Parker pulled up on the controls with all his might, trying to reduce the impact. Then, it happened. The first impact sent shockwaves through the aircraft. The tail section clipped the mountainside, tearing off in a spray of debris. The plane pitched forward violently, breaking apart as it smashed into the jagged rocks. The right wing tore away, sending a fireball into the sky. The fuselage split upon impact, scattering wreckage across the mountainside. A deafening explosion echoed through the valley, shaking the earth as flames consumed what was left of Emirates Flight 407.
Inside, silence. Hundreds of lives lost in an instant. Aftermath, the world in morning gas, the sun rose over the charred remains of the aircraft. Rescue teams began their grim task of searching through the twisted metal. The entire world watched in shock as news broke of the tragic accident, another devastating aviation disaster that claimed every soul on board. Investigators sifted through the wreckage, searching for answers. How had both engines caught fire at the same time? Was it a bird strike? A mechanical failure? A flaw in the aircraft's design? The world demanded answers, but none could change the devastating truth: hundreds of innocent passengers were gone forever. In airports across the globe, families and loved ones gathered, clinging to the last messages from those who had perished. A father stared at his phone, replaying his wife's final words: "I love you. Take care of the kids." A young boy, too young to understand, asked when his mother was coming home, but she never would. The crash of Emirates Flight 407 became one of the worst aviation disasters in history, a reminder of how even the most advanced technology can fail in an instant. The world mourned while investigators continued their search for the truth, desperate to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. The skies had claimed another tragedy, and hundreds of dreams were left unfinished, buried beneath the cold, merciless mountains.